This is your Tuesday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Got a lot to get to today. Phil Miller, who covers the Twins for the Star Tribune, will be with me in just a little bit. Had a great piece on Jose Berrios not too long ago. Has been covering tons of stuff for us lately and doing a great job doing it. So I'll have a conversation with Phil about a few different Twins things, trade deadline stuff, Jose Berrios discussion, Byron Buxton discussion coming up in just a little bit. I've got a Vikings injury that might seem minor right now, but I want to put it on your radar. I'm worried about it already. It is my nature to worry. Got some thoughts about Devin Booker and what might happen in Game 6 with the Suns and Bucks tonight. Bucks with a chance to close out that NBA Finals with a victory in Milwaukee. Suns trying to win Game 6 and send that back to Phoenix for a Game 7. Tidying up a little bit. Didn't talk much Loons yesterday. They had a big win Sunday over Seattle. Want to get into that a little bit more because I watched and enjoyed that game. But first, what did I miss? Now, a little bit of interesting dynamic here because I'm gonna bring on Phil Miller here in a minute to talk Jose Berrios, but Berrios also pitched Berrios also pitched Monday's Game 2 of the doubleheader between the Twins and the White Sox, and just the way that game went gave me all sorts of thoughts about his long-term future and kind of synthesized my thinking about that. So I'm going to get that clear first here before we talk to Phil Miller. And so here's what I'm thinking about Jose Berrios. The Twins have gotten exceptional value from Jose Berrios so far in his career. That's the way the baseball system is set up. I don't love the way it's set up, but it is set up that way. Think about this. They've paid Jose Berrios has basically been a rotation mainstay since 2017 and a durable one at that. Has had, double-digit wins, 3 years in a row. Then 2020, obviously less than that, but the shortened season was good again last year. So basically, this is his 5th year as a rotation mainstay, throwing a lot of innings, and he's basically been paid just north of $10 million. Contractually, probably would have been about 12 or 13, but last year's contracts were reduced greatly because of the COVID shortened season, but basically had league minimums for a few of those years. Then he got a raise to about $4 million last season that was truncated. Phil Miller gets into that a little bit. He's making $6 million this year, due for a big bump next year in arbitration, but then becomes a free agent after the 2022 season. So the big question now, and again, Phil and I will get into this, is what do the Twins do now? Because Jose Berrios is going to want a big payday. He's been kind of sitting here waiting for it. He didn't get that kind of, didn't get those bought out years, like a Max Kepler or a Jorge Polanco did with some of the money. But he's been kind of strategic about that. He wants a long-term contract, and some of the numbers being floated are pretty huge. We're talking about a guy who could command, upwards of $20 to $25 million on the open market if he hits free agency after next season. Now, the question then becomes, what do the Twins do? And I am of the mind that if you are running this Twins team like an optimized business, you cannot sign Jose Berrios to an extension. You have maximized your value on Jose Berrios so far, and the way to continue to maximize that value is to trade him, not to sign him. He's a good but not great pitcher. I like Jose Berrios a lot, but I kind of feel like at this point, he's 27 years old. If you're still waiting for the breakthrough, and again, we saw it in Monday's game, dominant early, tons of strikeouts. But, I think a true number one pitcher would have finished that game off and not given up that 3-run homer in the 7th inning. Maybe that's too small a sample size, but I feel like we've seen that a lot from Berrios over the years. He has that one inning where he can't quite get that one batter out to move into that next echelon. And I don't think this is a matter of can you afford Jose Berrios necessarily. You could afford Jose Berrios if you were the Twins, but if you pay Jose Berrios, let's say $25 million a year for 5 years, what are you getting for that? You're probably getting a slightly better version of himself right now because he is getting slightly better, but you're still getting, someone who's, I think, kind of like a number 2.5 starter. He can't be the best starter on a good team, on a team that wants to win the World Series in a mid-market like the Twins are, I don't think Jose Berrios can be paid that much. And I go back, and this is going to be kind of sound like a weird example, but there's a little bit of parallel here between Jose Berrios and Ryan Suter and Zach Parise. They signed those massive 13-year, $98 million matching contracts in 2012, and the Wild were, a little bit kind of chasing that money for a long time. They got to be good because those guys are very good players. You want those guys on your team, just like the Twins would want Jose Berrios on their team. But at that price, it then gives you a little bit of, it gives you a little bit less flexibility in what else you can do. I know baseball doesn't have a salary cap like hockey does. I know you can spend as much as you want theoretically, but let's face it, the Twins aren't going to spend the same as the Yankees, the Dodgers, the Red Sox. They just can't. The revenues are not the same. So the question then becomes, can you afford to have Jose Berrios on your roster at $25 million? I don't think you can, because then what does the rest of your pitching staff look like? Unless you hit on some other very low-budget guys, arms coming up who then replicate what Berrios did early in his career for high value for not a lot of money. That's a tough ask. That's a tough way to go. It kind of limits you. It limits where you go. If the Twins truly are going to maximize the Jose Berrios experience, and again, I don't like the way baseball is set up. I'm just saying I think Jose Berrios should get paid, but I also think he should get paid somewhere else. I don't think the Twins should re-sign him to an extension. I think if they are being smart and if they're being realistic, they're going to trade him in the next 10 days, or certainly they're going to trade him in the offseason.
I'm Nyla Jean Myers, Senior Assistant Sports Editor at the Star Tribune. Thank you for listening to Strip Sports Daily Delivery. This work is made possible by our Star Tribune subscribers. For unlimited access to the articles mentioned in this podcast and our coverage of Minnesota sports from pros to preps, go to startribune.com/subscribe.
I'd like to welcome in Phil Miller to the show today. Phil is in Chicago covering Twins White Sox, a series I think the Twins going into the break hoped would mean a little bit more, but kind of took care of that. Any kind of those good vibes that Nelson Cruz was talking about, the magical run, I don't think is happening, Phil, when you get swept by Detroit and get shut out twice in the 3-game series. That said, there's still some interesting things going on here, including I want to start with your recent piece on Jose Berrios. You talked to him, I believe it was Sunday in Detroit, if I'm not mistaken, and kind of got some insights into where he is in terms of contract and money and what his future is. Maybe you can anything that was left on the cutting room floor, and then anything that you can glean from Jose Berrios' situation, under team control through next season, but also kind of, wanting that long-term security one way or the other.
Yeah, Jose is a really interesting case, and the Twins kind of are in a difficult position here. For one thing, I think they will have to show their hand about how they feel about next season with what they do about Jose in the next week and beyond that this offseason. Jose has long wanted a long-term contract, and it never came to fruition. He's no longer a young guy who just wants a life-changing guarantee like Max Kepler, Miguel Sano, and Jorge Polanco got. He is now a year from free agency. He's making $6 million a year this year. He was supposed to make $4 million last year, but only got a little over a third of that because of the pandemic. He's having a great year, and if they go to arbitration this year, he will be able to compare himself to players who have gotten free agent contracts, which is allowed in your sixth year of before free agency. So he is looking at somewhere close to $15 to $20 million next year. So he no longer needs one of those. I don't want my career to end without me cashing in. He is now close enough where it makes much more sense for him. And he has one of the best sports agencies behind him in the business. So he's looking for a cash in big time, probably over $100 million, almost certainly over $100 million contract, whether it's with the Twins now or next a year from now in the off season when he's a free agent. Somebody will offer it to him, and we'll see now how serious the Twins are about keeping him. If they don't think it's possible, it makes the most sense to trade him now.
Yeah.
Unless they want to contend next year, unless they think they are have a legitimate chance next year. So they may very well tip their hand about how they feel about this team's immediate future by what they do with Buxton and what they do with Berrios.
And it's interesting. I mean, aside from money is the short answer, but what has been kind of the holdup over the years? And he never even signed one of those, like you said, the Max Kepler type deals, the Jorge Polanco deals. What's been the holdup between what's the gap there between what he wants and what they want? It must be pretty significant to not have that to not have that being not having had happen yet, at least.
Well, he's a guy who knows his value. He is a guy that has played with some teams that with some other teammates who have gotten big contracts. The reason the team makes those deals is because they lock up a year or two of free agency. Jose is very confident in his ability to stay healthy. He works hard at it, and he has indeed never been on the injured list. He's been the workhorse of the staff, so it never made sense for him to kind of sell himself short. He willingly took the risk, and now that has paid off, now that he has reached the part of his career when he's coming into what should be his prime. He's only 27 last month. He's earned the right to cash in. I think he's a smart guy about how he goes about it. And I think he just did not want to give up a year or two of free agency on 30 cents on the dollar, 40 cents on the dollar, if he turned out to be a great player. And he has turned out to be a borderline great player.
Yeah. And it's, what's interesting is I went back and looked at something you wrote. I think it was spring training 2019, when they had maybe made him a kind of one of those, buy you out of a year, a 5-year kind of deal offer back then. And you'd compared him at that point to some contracts signed by I think Luis Severino, and I think Aaron Nola was the other name that was mentioned in that piece. And if you kind of go back and look at it, those two provide kind of an extreme case. Nola's been very good, has probably pitched to that contract. Severino hasn't pitched since 2019. And I think you could argue the Twins got pretty good value kind of from these team control years from Berrios. And maybe this is kind of the smartest way to play it and not extend him, because Jose Berrios at $20 to $25 million, is he worth that? I'm sure they're asking themselves that question right now, but I'm having a hard time kind of putting a handle on who is who's going to blink here, and also who should blink. Should the Twins really commit that much to a guy who has been good and is probably the best version of himself this season, but hasn't ever crossed that threshold to, consistent number one, and maybe even not even, always a number two at this point?
Yeah, well, the system is set up. You are right that the Twins got the best value. That's how the system is set up for the first 4 to 5 years, especially, but even until free agency. Teams get incredible bargains out of their best players. And even Jorge Polanco making the $8 million he's making now is a great value for the Twins for what you get out of them. I would gather, I haven't done the math, but I would bet that Jose Berrios has been worth maybe close to $100 million for the Twins over his career so far. Maybe a little short of that, but he's only been paid less than 15. I mean, that's the system. Somebody has to take the risk. Usually it's the players. Sometimes the players accept a lower contract than they might be worth in order to lock up, some money early in their career, like you would normally do. Now it's time for 29 other bidders, not now, but in another year. And the one thing I mentioned in that story is you could make a case that Jose Berrios is in the same part of his career that Max Scherzer was when he reached the age of 27, his fifth year. He had a breakthrough year. He became a Cy Young winner. Jose's not going to do that, but he's having a good year. Teams are going to pay for the prospect that he is going to even be better, continue on this career path, that he's going to be Aaron Nolan and not Luis Severino. I don't know if the Twins will blink. I don't get the feeling Jose will blink, but there are 29 other teams that may well write that check.
Do you have a gut instinct right now? Is he here in 2 weeks, or is it? I mean, I guess that's the big thing. Like, are they going to tip their hand that much, or do you think they at least carry this into the off season?
I think he's here in 2 weeks. I think the asking price must be astronomical because you're getting a year and a half of good value out of him. He's never been hurt. A lot of contending teams would want him. But if the Twins want to have any hope of contending next year, I mean, look at this pitching staff. What is their pitching staff without him? They need to keep him to be realistic, to make a realistic take a realistic shot at next year. So I think they will keep him for the last 2 months of the season, and then in the off season evaluate, can we get to where we want to be? I would be surprised if Jose is here after this winter. And if he is, I would really be surprised if he lasts another year in Minnesota. I think you're right. The Twins have a history of not paying pitchers. Who's the highest paid pitcher they've ever had? Jose, I think it must be Irvin Santana a few years ago.
I think it still is Irvin Santana. Another guy that is kind of in the same boat in terms of the timeline is Byron Buxton. What do we know about that? I think there was some scuttle anyway that they were, talking about an extension there. Where do we know anything more about that?
It's an identical case. I mean, they both become free agents next year. They're both worth well more than the Twins have paid and they'll probably be willing to pay. Buxton's problem is health, obviously. While Berrios has never been injured, Buxton is constantly injured. I know the Twins are trying to find a contract that protects both sides. I just don't see how it's possible. The upside for Byron Buxton is an MVP caliber season. I don't know that the Twins are ready to pay that kind of money.
Couple more things for you, Phil Miller. Really enjoying this conversation. Great reporting too on all this during the road trip, post break, and leading up to the trade deadline. Who if we don't think Berrios and Buxton are trade candidates, or at least are likely to be traded before the deadline, and Buxton certainly doesn't seem like someone who would be dealt before the deadline. That's the kind of move that doesn't really get made before the deadline typically. What's Nelson Cruz is probably the biggest name, but what do you imagine would be the highest profile trade that could happen that would bring back the highest value? Is it a Taylor Rogers? Is it somebody else? What do you think could we see going out that would maximize any kind of value?
Well, it's clearly Berrios if they decide to trade him. There are a lot of teams that would line up for a pitcher like that. I think Nelson Cruz is as good as gone, as much as he would like to stay. I think there are a lot of teams. Well, there are 2 or 3 teams, one in particular in Toronto, that would very much like him in the lineup. Taylor Rogers, Andrelton Simmons, Hansel Robles, all the one-year contract guys. One guy that might be interesting to a few teams is Max Kepler. The Twins would be selling low on him. He's had a rough year, but his replacements are already on the field in the lineup, Kirilloff and Larnach. So it would not surprise me if he is kind of the unexpected trade coming up.
Is Kepler's contract through 2023 if he signed the 5-year back then, or is it just?
Yes, his is 23 and Polanco's 24, I believe. Yeah.
Well, Phil Miller, great stuff. Any wild predictions? Anything else to come from these next 10 days? Whether it's in the division with the Twins, anybody else? What anything that we might not see coming, or what do you expect? I guess down the stretch here.
What don't we see coming? What can we expect that we don't see coming? That seems like a tough one there, right? But I would say expect them to get a good look at all their young pitching down the stretch. I think that we're 6 players away from the record for most Twins in a season, and I believe we're going to shatter that. I suspect the lineup in a month from now is going to be a half full of guys that we don't know about yet.
Great stuff, Phil. Appreciate it. Enjoy Chicago, and we'll catch up again soon. All right.
Okay, Mike.
Again, great reporting from Phil Miller. And also check out today's Star Tribune. Lavelle E. Neal III, longtime baseball writer, now our columnist, had a piece on Byron Buxton and how the Twins could come to an agreement with him on a contract extension. I think that one's more plausible, but we will see about that as well.
AC out there in the flat. The ball's thrown in low. That isn't Snelker's fault.
That sounder is for Devin Booker today. Devin Booker, excellent guard for the Phoenix Suns. By the way, I don't think the Wolves are going to be able to trade for him. Remember that was the hot rumor fantasy a couple of years ago that Devin Booker, because he's playing for the Suns and the Suns were terrible, might want to reunite with his buddy Karl Anthony Towns with the Timberwolves. That ship sailed about a year ago when the Suns went 8-0 in the bubble, and certainly has sailed now that the Suns are in the NBA Finals. Suns are in trouble, though. 3-2 Milwaukee lead. I think Game 5 was, the real turning point. Game 4, you could argue too. I think the Giannis block on DeAndre Ayton late might have saved that game, might have saved that series. Then of course the Giannis dunk the other night kind of put a punctuation mark on that win, giving the Bucks a 3-2 series win, giving them a chance to win and close out this series at home tonight in Milwaukee. It's not been Devin Booker's fault, though. Devin Booker, 40-point games each of the last 2 games for Phoenix on efficient shooting, more than 50% in each game. The Game 4 loss in particular in Milwaukee when he had 42 points on 17 of 28 shooting, made all but one of his free throws. I'd like to see him bump up some of his other numbers aside from fouls. He's only had 1 rebound and 2 assists a couple games ago. Hasn't had a lot of assists. I think I saw a stat that he's not had a fourth quarter assist in this whole finals, but he's there to score primarily, and he's done that. 40 points in that loss the other night, 42 the night before. Not Devin Booker's fault. He needs more help from his teammates, most importantly Chris Paul, who I think has come up a little bit short in this series. I think Devin Booker needs to keep doing what he's doing. Not his fault, and I think Chris Paul needs to have the kind of game they brought him in to have. And if that happens, I think Phoenix wins this game and brings it back to Phoenix and clinches this thing in Game 7 in a few nights. Got to talk Loons for a little bit here. Minnesota United had a big win over Seattle on Sunday. Patrick Royce and I didn't get to that a whole lot on Monday's podcast. Shocking, I know, that Patrick and I could not engage Patrick in a ton of soccer talk at the end of that show. But I just wanted to bring that up because it was a significant victory. It was the first time that Minnesota United had ever beaten Seattle in a Major League Soccer match. I believe it had been an 8-match history before that with, I think, 7 losses and a draw. I know Seattle had some injuries. I know they got some guys out for international play. I don't think anybody right now, though, has their ideal starting 11 right now. So let's not just brush away this win. I thought it was an evenly played match from what I saw. I didn't see much of the first half, saw most of the second half. It was back and forth. Seattle almost took a lead, called offside on a set piece. The Loons looked like they were going to get a penalty. They might have eventually if it had been called on video review, but it didn't matter because while during the run of play still after a questionable takedown in the box, Robin Ludd scored again and gave him the 1-0 win at Allianz. So, just a big win for the Loons. Not a whole lot more to say besides that, but just a franchise marker. When you have a game like that, it can propel you to a certain degree. It kind of gives you that confidence. It gets that kind of monkey off your back, so to speak. And, and importantly, too, in the standings, it solidifies your spot. They're now 6th in the West. That would be a playoff spot if the playoffs started tomorrow. And let's face it, with the way they're sitting in the standings right now, kind of going back and forth a little bit, Seattle's someone that they could see or have to get through in the West if they are going to achieve their, ultimate goals this year of winning an MLS Cup. So big win for sure for the Loons on Sunday, and we'll see if they can keep this going the rest of the year. Next match coming up here on Saturday against Portland doesn't get a whole lot easier. That will be an important one as well. Let's finish with the cooler. I'm worried, you guys. I saw Ben Gessling's report that Michael Pierce could miss the start of training camp because of a calf injury. The reporting, and Ben's good at this, the reporting is that it's believed to be minor. According to a source, he might miss the first couple weeks of training camp. God, when I hear that, though, you guys, I get worried. I get worried about tweaks. I get worried about leg injuries for 341-pound interior defensive lineman with the Vikings. Anytime there's a minor injury, anytime someone's off the field at the start of training camp, I start to get concerned. I'm putting this one on watch right now. I'm on Michael Pierce watch right now. I want to see when he really does return to the field, really is back full go. Because my sense when things like this happen is that it ends up being longer than 2 weeks into training camp, that this could affect the start of his season and things like that, believed to be minor. Again, that's good reporting from Ben. I'm not questioning his reporting. What I'm questioning sometimes is how these things play out in reality versus how the team might like them to play out. And let's face it, they're counting on Michael Pierce a lot. Opted out last season. It was their big kind of free agent middle of the defense signing a year ago, but because of potential COVID complications, sat out last season. He and Dalvin Tomlinson are supposed to really revamp that interior of the line, give them a much bigger run-stopping presence, maybe give them a little bit of pass rush from time to time, but really solidify that defense. Along with several other key additions. Maybe this means a little bit more Sheldon Richardson at the beginning, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I'm just asking you, watch what happens with this injury. I'm never convinced that these things are as minor as they seem at the beginning. I hope they are for the Vikings' sake and for Michael Pierce's sake, but I'm officially on watch right now. And I'm going to give you updates periodically on when Michael Pierce actually gets back versus, this optimistic could miss the first couple weeks of training camp that is now being floated after his calf injury was reported. That'll do it for today. Thank you so much for joining me on Daily Delivery. Sarah McClellan covers the Wild. We got a whole lot to talk about with Zach Parisi and Ryan Suter. We'll talk some expansion draft, maybe a little bit of upcoming NHL draft as well with her on Wednesday's show. Thanks for joining me here today. We'll catch you again tomorrow.